The clothes didn't fit, literally and figuratively. Meghan Markle's fashion missteps, from oversized silhouettes to mismatched monochromes, have drawn harsh commentary, but the criticism goes beyond aesthetics. For critics, these choices have come to symbolize something deeper, a disconnect between image and substance. And now, with her Montecito mansion exposed as leased or borrowed, that visual metaphor feels even sharper. She wore a life of wealth and tradition like an ill-fitting outfit, draped over borrowed settings and curated angles.
If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update.
The symbolism doesn't stop at the wardrobe. With every detail questioned, from home ownership to authenticity, Meghan's brand is being unraveled by its own inconsistencies. Staged interviews in rented homes, curated content that feels increasingly artificial, and mounting financial rumors have turned public sentiment. Her image, one untouchable, now feels overperformed. In contrast to Kardashian's transparent approach, Meghan's curated facade is becoming a liability, not a strength. Kim Kardashian didn't have to say Meghan Markle's name. All she did was post a line in an interview about how she prefers filming her show in her own home, unlike others who borrow spaces, and the internet immediately understood the shade. It wasn't subtle, and it wasn't random. That single sentence was a direct hit to the carefully crafted narrative Meghan's been building for years, the one where she's thriving in Montecito, living a glamorous, authentic life with Prince Harry. But the truth is that Montecito mansion, the one featured in her media appearances, stylized photo shoots, and yes, that Netflix series, isn't what it seems. Because according to a growing pile of rumors, public record searches, and keen-eyed sleuths, Meghan doesn't own it. Not officially. The dream home? It's leased, borrowed, staged. And that comment from Kim? It shattered the illusion in one passive-aggressive swoop. People had been suspicious for a while. Every time Meghan popped up on screen or in a glossy magazine spread, something felt off. The home looked too curated, too catalog perfect, too interchangeable. When she and Harry filmed their Netflix series,
If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update.
critics noticed inconsistencies in the background, suggesting the setting was a facade. Then came the reports of an $8 million farmhouse she'd been using, a property that didn't align with ownership records. These weren't just internet theories. They were backed up by conflicting listings and property data that cast serious doubt on whether Meghan and Harry actually owned their residence. The pattern kept repeating. Flashy backdrops, luxury aesthetics, but no real permanence. And it wasn't just about the house. It was about what the house represented. Meghan and Harry had built an entire public image around the idea of leaving the rigidity of royal life behind for something real, something self-made. But when your so-called dream life is staged on borrowed land, it doesn't scream authenticity, it screams performance. The couple's appearances have become exercises in maintaining that illusion. From their Netflix docuseries to podcast setups and magazine features, the surroundings always look impeccable. But they also look temporary. Critics argue that the over-curation makes the scenes feel more like a showroom than a lived-in home. That's the kind of detail viewers pick up on, especially when the entire point of the content is to appear vulnerable and real. It all began unraveling after the Oprah interview, when audiences started paying close attention to the Markle brand. The backyard where Meghan and Harry sat during their now infamous interview with Oprah was not their actual home. That fact flew under the radar at the time, but in hindsight, it was a major red flag. If you're trying to show the world your truth, why rent a backdrop? And more importantly, what does it say about the stability of your new life when even your most vulnerable moment is filmed on someone else's property? The questions grew louder as more staged moments surfaced, and Meghan's image started to feel less relatable and more manufactured. Fashion choices added fuel to the fire. Meghan, once hailed as a style icon, began turning heads for the wrong reasons. Monochrome looks that swallowed her frame, oddly matched accessories, and outfits that felt more costume than couture. None of it helped the authenticity crisis. Her fashion sense was beginning to reflect the larger issue. Everything looked expensive, but nothing looked effortless. Critics weren't just nitpicking clothes. They were responding to how off-brand the presentation felt. The whole aesthetic, clothing, home, interviews seem constructed to signal wealth and sophistication. But when the surface starts to crack, even the finest fabrics can't distract from what's missing underneath. That's why Kim Kardashian's comment hit so hard. Because say what you will about Kim, she films in her own home. She shows the actual spaces she lives in. Sometimes messy, sometimes ridiculous, but undeniably hers. It's a level of transparency Meghan hasn't been able to match, and the contrast is stark. Whether intentional or not, Kim positioned herself as a more authentic figure, and that's devastating in a PR war where relatability is currency. Meghan, trying to reclaim her narrative through documentaries and curated content, ended up exposing how little of it seemed to belong to her. That includes the house, the image, and increasingly, the trust of her. The irony is brutal. Meghan left the royal family, citing the need for independence, privacy, and authenticity. But instead of showing stability, her new life looks like a series of leases, both literal and metaphorical. She may have escaped the monarchy, but she's still performing, only now for a different kind of crown, celebrity influence. And the public is noticing. Social media has turned on her, with users dissecting everything from her lighting setups to her choice of throw pillows. The Markle brand is losing its grip, not because people hate her, but because they don't believe her. The aura of truth that once made her sympathetic is now being questioned on every level. Meanwhile, comparisons to Princess Catherine haven't done Meghan any favors. Catherine, who's often portrayed as reserved and conservative, has something Meghan's brand is struggling to regain: consistency. Her public appearances may be tightly controlled, but they are not shifting sets in borrowed spaces. Where Meghan is battling for control of her image, Catherine is benefiting from staying the course. It's not about who's more glamorous or who has the better wardrobe. It's about who feels grounded. In the court of public opinion, authenticity wins, and right now, Meghan's portfolio of leased visuals is coming up short. Even Queen Camilla, once a media pariah herself, has found a way to survive the scrutiny without staging a lifestyle. There's an odd credibility that comes from not overcorrecting. Camilla doesn't try to be adored. She doesn't perform vulnerability or authenticity. She simply exists within her role, flaws and all. In contrast, Meghan's attempt to control the narrative through curated aesthetics makes her look more insecure, not less. The borrowed homes, the strategic lighting, the filtered perfection, it's all starting to resemble a set design rather than a lived experience. And that's exactly what people are rejecting. At the heart of this controversy is a fundamental problem. The more Meghan tries to showcase her real life, the more artificial it looks. Every step toward transparency seems to reveal another layer of performance. The house that's not hers, the fashion that doesn't fit, the stories that feel rehearsed. Financial rumors aren't helping either. Reports of deferred maintenance, backdoor loans, and shell companies tied to properties are circulating alongside claims of legal loopholes used to obscure ownership. It's painting a portrait of instability, not the fairy tale independence that was sold. What started as a hopeful break from tradition has turned into a crisis of credibility. Meghan's empire wasn't supposed to rely on the same smoke and mirrors she claimed to be escaping. But the more the curtain gets pulled back, the more the illusion dissolves, and what's left behind isn't royalty. It's a lifestyle brand running out of runway. If you've been following this saga, you know this isn't just about a house. It's about the foundation of a public identity built on borrowed time and borrowed spaces. The backlash isn't just mean-spirited commentary. It's a response to a growing sense that the story doesn't add up. And in an age where audiences value sincerity over spectacle, that disconnect is fatal. Hit that like button if you've seen the cracks too. Drop a comment if you think the Meghan brand can recover. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what comes next. When people started poking holes in the fantasy, Meghan's response wasn't silence. It was more staging, more curated Instagram moments, more photo ops in luxe but generic spaces, more emphasis on aesthetics over substance. But instead of controlling the narrative, it only confirmed what critics suspected. The Authenticity Act had gone too far. There's a difference between privacy and performance, and the line became impossible to miss. The settings kept changing, but none of them felt like home. And when every interview is shot from a new angle in a different space that looks like it came straight out of a design catalog, people stop seeing it as aspirational and start seeing it as calculated. Even supporters started pulling back. The Netflix deal, once considered a fresh chapter, turned into a spectacle of overproduction. People weren't moved, they were confused. How many homes do you need to tell a love story? How many perfectly fluffed pillows and rented chandeliers before it just feels like a set? It became harder to defend when so much of the footage lacked grounding. Where was the soul? Where were the organic, lived-in moments? The series was supposed to show Meghan and Harry unfiltered. But in the end, it was just another example of glossy storytelling propped up by carefully selected visuals and a script that tiptoed around the real questions. Looking back, the Oprah interview marked the moment the cracks became impossible to ignore. Meghan's emotional disclosures had impact, but the reveal that even that conversation took place in someone else's backyard now haunts the credibility of it all. The symbolism is almost too on the nose, a discussion about being silenced, held in a space she didn't own, framed to look like it was Hayes. That detail, once minor, now feels like a metaphor for the entire operation. Every truth Meghan tried to share has been dulled by the realization that the set was fake. And when the backdrop is questionable, people start to question everything else, every quote, every tear, every detail. By the time the Montecito mansion was questioned, audiences had already seen the pattern. The leases, the faux finishes, the decorative books placed perfectly on coffee tables that never seemed to have fingerprints, it all blurred into one long, airbrushed mirage. There's nothing inherently wrong with renting, or even staging. The issue is pretending otherwise while claiming authenticity. That's the trap Meghan walked into. She wanted to own her story, but instead, she outsourced the visuals and handed over the narrative to stylists, consultants, and PR advisors who forgot that people can tell when something doesn't feel real. And just like that, Kim Kardashian became the unlikely mirror. She doesn't pretend to be something she's not. You know her homes are Hayes because you've watched her build them from the marble up. She's transparent about her excess. You can argue it's too much, but at least it's Hayes. When Kim threw that line about filming in her own house, it wasn't just pettiness. It was positioning. It was a staking a claim to realness in an industry built on illusion. In one sentence, she undermined Meghan's entire presentation without having to name. Meanwhile, the royal family, who Meghan had accused of being out of touch and performative, suddenly looked less artificial by comparison. Their palaces are old, often musty, and painfully real. Their photos aren't always flattering. Their appearances are rigid, but they don't try to fake intimacy or modern cool. And for some viewers, that contrast was sobering. If the rebellious, free-spirited couple who fled royal life is now living in a rented palace of their own, are they really that different from what they left behind? Or are they just recreating the same performance in another? Catherine didn't need to say anything. Her silence, her steady roll, her less-is-more approach only highlighted the noise coming from California. She wears outfits more than once, steps out with minimal fanfare, and avoids curated vulnerability. Whether you like her or not, it reads as stable. That stability, paired with Meghan's frequent resets, has only made the difference starker. One is leaning into routine. The other is constantly reinventing. And when audiences crave consistency, reinvention starts to feel like desperation. Meghan's every move now gets filtered through the lens of what is she trying to sell us? Camilla, a figure who once endured unrelenting public scorn, somehow came out looking more grounded. She didn't stage a comeback through aesthetics. She just kept showing up. That endurance, paired with a refusal to chase public affection, earned her a grudging respect. By contrast, Meghan's curated approach made it feel like she was trying to win a game people weren't even playing. The homes, the fashion, the documentaries, they were all supposed to restore her image. But when you build a brand on relatability, and people realize they've never seen your actual kitchen, something breaks. The most devastating part is that Meghan had the chance to build something real. People wanted to root for her. But when the perception of truth becomes just another marketing strategy, audiences check out. That Montecito mansion, meant to symbolize escape and freedom, now feels like a prop in a very expensive theater. Even her defenders are quieter now. The gap between her message and her methods is too wide. You can't sell vulnerability and then stage it. You can't preach authenticity from a set that's rented by the hour. The dissonance is too strong, and it's eroding whatever goodwill she had left. And then there's Harry. once the rebel prince, now looking like a co-star in a production he doesn't quite control. His reputation hasn't been spared in all this. The man who walked away from the palace is now appearing in content that feels more scripted than anything Buckingham Palace ever released. He was supposed to be the grounding force. But now, he's part of the aesthetic. The matching outfits, the soft-focus interviews, the stage family moments, it all reads like a catalog shoot for a life that doesn't exist. And as the layers peel back, people are asking the same thing they asked after that first Oprah interview. What's real and what's not? Every time a new image dropped of Meghan in another neutral-toned, sprawling interior with cascading greenery and a perfectly staged tray of matcha, it reignited the conversation. Who owns the house? Where's this shot? Is it even the same place as last time? The questions didn't go away. They multiplied. What once passed for tasteful luxury was now seen as smoke and mirrors. There was no comfort, no permanence, just aesthetics in high rotation. The exact thing Meghan was supposed to be running from, manufactured image, rigid expectations, was being rebuilt brick by carefully styled brick in California. Harry, who always carried that undercurrent of emotional rawness, was suddenly harder to read. He was still opening up in interviews, still pushing the healing journey narrative, but it was being filmed from a different borrowed corner every time. The disconnect between the message and the medium was too obvious to ignore. The brand they were building thrived on relatability, but viewers couldn't relate to luxury that didn't belong to them. It's hard to connect when everything seemed filtered through a PR lens, right down to the furniture. And for people who once felt inspired by their escape from royal rigidity, the cracks in that narrative stung a little more. That infamous Oprah moment, once seen as brave and revolutionary, now gets reframed in light of everything that followed. A bold, emotional confessional delivered not from their real home, but a friend's garden. A borrowed set, styled to look like their sanctuary. It didn't seem like a big deal back then, but with hindsight, it adds up. That interview kicked off a pattern that hasn't broken. From podcasts to docuseries to cover shoots, it's all staged. The authenticity is performative. And in today's media culture, where every frame gets picked apart, nothing survives scrutiny unless it's real. There's a difference between being curated and being calculated. Meghan leans so heavily into visual control that it becomes hard to separate her from the image. Her hair is always polished, her outfit's immaculately monotone, her lighting soft and forgiving. But none of it sticks. Why? Because the soul of the content is missing. People don't want to see perfection. They want to see proof of life. They want to see someone who can laugh without rehearsing it, speak without reading it, live without staging it. When everything feels like a brand campaign, there's nothing left for people to connect to. Kim may be the queen of branding, but her key difference is ownership. She lets people into her real spaces. She talks about her money, her surgeries, her mess. She doesn't always come off as deep, but she comes off as honest about who she is. And in the long run, that matters more. That subtle dig she threw about filming in her own home wasn't just throwing shade. It was setting a standard. I don't borrow my life, is what she was really saying. And when the public lined up behind her on that, it told you everything about where the cultural tide is. The royal family may be rigid, traditional, and cold in their own ways, but they are predictable. They don't pretend to be influencers. They don't chase relatability through Instagram filters, and that's become their accidental strength. In contrast to Meghan's changing aesthetics and borrowed estates, the palace now looks stable, even if it's emotionally vacant. What was once viewed as archaic now looks refreshingly honest. You know what you're getting. The walls don't move. The backgrounds don't change. The Queen's corgis weren't props. They were always there. That kind of consistency, ironically, is what Meghan gave up and hasn't been able to replicate on her own terms. Catherine, often criticized for being too perfect or too rehearsed, now seems effortlessly secure. Her photos may be staged too, but the setting never changes. She lives where she says she lives. She raises her kids without changing sets. That's not relatability, it's stability. In the war of perception, that subtle difference is everything. Meghan tries to appeal to hearts. Catherine doesn't try at all. And that non-performance is winning over more people, especially now that Meghan's over-curation feels like smoke. Even Camilla, who once bore the brunt of tabloid vilification, is proof that riding out the storm often works better than trying to curate it away. She stayed. She aged. She endured. And now she stands next to the king with zero need to be liked. Meghan, on the other hand, tried to leapfrog public opinion by producing her own story, and it's starting to collapse under its own edits. When every frame is calculated, every space is leased, every statement is rehearsed, you don't look powerful. You look insecure. The optics of renting a lifestyle you claim to have built is damning. It feeds into every other criticism about authenticity, about privilege, about performative wokeness wrapped in designer trench coats. This isn't just gossip. It's reputation collapse in slow motion. People don't need perfection. They need proof. Proof that you live where you say you live. Proof that your story is rooted in something more than good lighting and marble countertops. When you borrow the trappings of wealth to maintain the illusion of success, eventually the lease runs out, and so does the public's patience. What started as a royal rebellion has turned into content fatigue. Harry and Meghan wanted to show the world they could make it on their own, but the borrowed homes and hollow narratives are telling a different story. They traded palaces for production sets, titles for content deals, public duty for public performance. There was a window where they could have built something real. Instead, they built something marketable. Now, every new release is met with skepticism. Every interview, every podcast, every promotional shoot is dissected not for what's said, but for where it's filmed. Because when people stop believing the background, they stop believing the story. If you've made it this far, you know this isn't just about Meghan's house. It's about the cost of maintaining a brand when the foundation is unstable. Like if the curtain fell tomorrow, would there be anything real behind it? Hit that thumbs up if you've noticed the same patterns. Share it with someone who's been side-eyeing those Montecito mansion photos. And if you're into this kind of analysis, hit that button so you don't miss the next unraveling.